In 1950, only 11% of China's population inhabited urban areas. At that time, China had about 600 million people. By 2011, more than half of China was living in cities, and many of these big cities. Today, in 2023, China has a population of over 1.4 billion people. Of these, 65% of the population is now living in cities, and this number is projected to move up to 75% of the population in the next few decades. China has a lot of people. Overcrowded buses and overcrowded cities are the norm, but there are still a few last wild places. Yo, this is Ben Covich from Elevated Trips, and we are exploring some of the last wild places in China. We're driving from Xining, the capital of Qinghai province, down to Yushu, which is in southern Qinghai province, and we're on this road at 4,000 meters. You can see there's not a single other car on the road, just a few other trucks I've seen in the last few hours. And we just saw Tibetan antelope, wild ass, which is wild donkeys, Tibetan fox, all sorts of beautiful wildlife out here. And this is barren tundra on the Tibetan Plateau. You can see the road out here. Whew, it's just chilly. It's freezing cold, snow everywhere. It is October 5th, October holiday. And if your car were to break down out here, you'd be in serious trouble because there's not that many people out here that are going to be able to help you. So this is a barren land. Tibetans live out here, in tents out here, and they herd their yaks in this wilderness on the Tibetan Plateau. And that's about the only form of life that moves around on this tundra. And we're going to be exploring this highway going down to Yushu today and the beautiful mountains surrounding one of the last wild places in China, Yushu in Qinghai province. We just drove 800 kilometers from Xining to Yushu the last few days, and we saw no trees at all because we're at such a high altitude. It's too cold and too windy for trees to grow. So we're about an hour outside of Yushu town here along the Yangtze River, or a tributary of the Yangtze River, and we're experiencing this beautiful fall foliage, which is so amazing. It's October 3rd, and we're just surrounded by these beautiful yellow trees. It's like something out of Maine or New Hampshire in the fall in America. And this is really, really exceptional, especially for the Tibetan Plateau, which just has so few trees growing on it. To see trees at all, I just want to just lay down in the grass and just roll around and have a little picnic because, man, it is just so nice to see some trees for the first time in many, many months. The Yangtze River is the longest river in Eurasia and one of the longest rivers on the earth. Many cities and other significant geographical spots are connected by this famous river, including Shanghai, Nanjing, Wuhan, and Chongqing, as well as places like the Three Gorges and Tiger Leaping Gorge. It is so long and passes through so many different geographical zones that its main stream is divided into 4 rivers. Okay guys, this is a super cool and geographically important area just outside of Yushu. So the river behind me, you can see this is actually the Yangtze River, or in Chinese the Chongjiang River. That's a super browny brown one that's a little bit big. And then you can see it comes right together with this more local blue river. And then this is actually the confluence of the 2 rivers. This blue river is the one that runs through Yushu town specifically, and then it meets up with the Yangtze. Really, really cool. Qinghai province, as you may have seen from some of my other videos, at the source of the Yellow River and Mekong River is the source of the three rivers in China, three major rivers, the Yellow River, the Mekong River, and the Yangtze River. So it's a really important place geographically. It's a huge province with only about 5 million people in the whole province. And it's bigger than France, but as the source of all these rivers, it's really, really important as all these rivers flow down into the rest of China. Of the four major river sections, the largest is the Tagong River, or Long River, curving through lowland plains and between the mountains of middle China. A large and wide river with flowing ships on it from Yibin to its mouth at Shanghai. Above is the Jinshan, or the Golden Sands River, curving through deep gorges of eastern Tibet from Yushu at 3,600 meters down to Yibin, where it meets the Changjiang. Further northwest is the Tongtian, meaning passing through Heaven River, from the Grasslands at 4,400 meters down into Yushu, curving through deep green valleys, and finally, this wildest section by the Tuoto River, or Tearful River, from the glaciers of Gar Kangri in the Tangala Mountains. And this place has an average elevation of 5,800 meters and curves through endless, high-altitude, desolate tundra regions. If you go to Yushu, you will find yourself in a modern urban area with wide boulevards, parks, malls, squares, and everything else that makes Yushu a big modern city of 100,000 people. But if you zoom out and look at it from space, you'll see that this city is in the heart of a high-altitude wilderness. It is surrounded by hills, a valley with curving rivers, and endless grasslands. The only traces of human presence in this wilderness are several scattered villages and towns, roads connecting them, and some Tibetan nomad tents, their inhabitants, and their yaks. October 3rd, beautiful fall day. We're hiking up the mountain here to do a little picnic. Gathered some wood from a few of the local trees. There are very few of them, but we got just enough wood. And gonna make a little fire, do hot dogs. Right here at about 4,000 meters, moving up the slope, probably about a 7 to 10% grade. Not super difficult as far as steepness, but altitude, kicking my butt. Whew, taking it slow. We're really enjoying the fall colors. Little hints of yellow here, back here. See some of these alpine bushes. We're hiking just below this gnarly granite ridge. Further west, this wilderness becomes almost completely uninhabited, gradually merging into one of the wildest areas on the earth, with some of the harshest conditions on the planet. This area is called the Tibetan Plateau and has an average elevation of over 4,900 meters. Even for Tibetan nomads, who admittedly are some of the toughest people in the world living at some of the highest altitudes, this place is too high, too cold, and too barren. All right, this is the top of the hike for us. It's not the top of the mountain because you can see there's much more mountain above us, but this is a nice little saddle with some rocky outcrops. And I'm gonna fly my drone up here and it's gonna be sweet. So we're about 10 kilometers outside of Yushu here, and behind me is what's called a sky burial site. So when Tibetans bury their dead, the land is often quite frozen. It's hard to bury them. And so the way they actually dispose of the dead bodies is they chop up the bones and they feed them to vultures. And so just over the hill there is actually the site where they put the dead bodies, and the vultures consume the bones and the flesh from the bodies. And this is kind of just where they congregate and wait for those events. And in the meantime, the locals drop off their leftover scraps of meat, and maybe if they have a yak that dies of sickness or something like that, they'll drop it off here, and the vultures will consume the meat from the leftover yak or sheep body or bones. So this is probably about 100 to 200 vultures. Most of these guys are huge. They have about a 2-meter wingspan. They're only really indigenous to Tibet and a few parts of Nepal. So really difficult to see these outside of Tibet. They're a really special feature of the Tibetan Plateau. They're really quite a beautiful bird. You can definitely smell the kind of the rotten meat in the bones here, as there's quite a few rotten carcasses back there. But really interesting bird, and yeah, that's how they feed off the ecosystem. All right, we've been driving up this high pass here. You can see these mountain ridges behind me. Some of those mountains are 5,600 meters tall, so that's pretty big. We haven't been that high today. We've maybe been 4,000 to maybe 4,300, but some of those tops of the mountains are pretty gnarly and would be really difficult to climb, especially with the altitude. So that's taller than anything actually in all of the Alps. So, and most of those have never been named or never even really been climbed. They're just kind of these wild mountains. That's one thing I really love about Yushu, making it one of the really last wild places in the world.